One moment I was sprinting toward a date with the cutest girl in my engineering class. The next, I was waking up face down in mud, inside a skinny body, 2041 years in the past, with an SSS rank engineer system claiming the only way home was to complete 7 civilization quest lines. It chose a fantastic time to explain that, because the stone wall below me was preparing to bury 43 people alive. Judging by the claw-shaped bruise across my ribs, the previous owner of this body had also just lost an argument with a 9-foot terror bird, not a dragon, not a saber-toothed monster. A giant prehistoric chicken had kicked him off a ledge and apparently opened a vacancy. Welcome to my new life, everybody. I raised my head. My arms looked like damp sticks. My shirt was woven grass and hide, and a horse-sized red crest was disappearing into the trees. The memories arriving in my skull gave me the language, the local faces, and one humiliating fact. This body's name was also KYE, and he was famous for dropping tools. A blue-gold panel unfolded across my vision. It showed 7 locked symbols, 0 progress, and a small gold stamp rating my engineering compatibility SSS. The panel told me I had been thrown 2041 years into this world's past, and there was only one route home: complete all 7 civilization quest lines. How long was this going to take? Someone screamed below me. Flint water sat on rough terraces above a river. The upper terrace was held by a dry stone retaining wall twice my height, and rain had swollen its center outward. Below it sat the storm shelter. 43 people were still inside. Workers were carrying more stone toward the bulge, while others smeared clay into every gap where water escaped. They were making it worse. A broad man with iron-gray hair pointed at me. "GAH Rowe, Flint Water's master builder. KYE, if you can stand, carry stone. Stop plugging the leaks." Every head turned. "The wall is leaking," GAH Rowe said. "The leaking is the only reason it hasn't fallen." A young healer with a crimson-brown braid looked from me to the wall, fluttering. "Explain quickly." Water had saturated the soil behind the stones. Every gap they sealed raised the pressure. The wall was rotating around its buried base. I pointed beside GAH Rowe. "That flat stone comes out next." GAH Rowe stepped away. The stone fired from the wall and split a basket behind him. Nobody moved. Great. I had attention. I still needed pipe, a drill, proper timber, and about 6 hours we did not have. Then I saw bundles of hollow river reed. Drive those through the lowest joints. Let the water out, then brace the face while the pressure falls. The first reed collapsed under the stone mallet. GAH Rowe's expression said the bird should have kicked me harder. NAH Raw wrapped the next reed in wet rawhide and slid it through a hollow bone collar. "Your wall chews the sides," she said. "Try this." I had the degree. These people had the materials. We needed both. The reinforced reed entered a loose joint near the base. Brown water exploded from it hard enough to knock the mallet away. The wall's groan softened. GAH Rowe's face changed. "How many?" 5 drains across the bulge, 2 timber triangles against the face, wide stone feet, crossbeam under the cracked course. "Do not compact the mud." GAH Rowe repeated the orders, and flint water moved. NAH Raw bound reeds. Bryn, the stoneworker this body remembered as father, carved openings without shattering them. ORN, the settlement elder, marked where blue mana silt pulsed strongest. GAH Rowe placed the workers. I supplied the load path. They made it real. The third drain clogged. 1 timber foot sank. The crossbeam slipped, and the wall leaned far enough for stone to grind against stone. My new little sister was still inside the shelter. The body's fear became mine before I could separate the two. Unload the left brace. Stone pad beneath it. Open the center joint and let it break where we choose. GAH Rowe trusted me for one breath. Bryn drove the wedge. NAH Raw pulled the family clear. ORN struck the clogged reed until a plug of blue mud burst free. Water ripped through the drainage trench. The center face dropped. Both timber triangles bent, the joints tightened, and the wall stopped. No miracle. Just water leaving, weight finding a safer path, and 43 people walking out beneath a structure that should already have killed them. Flint water went silent. Then Pip ran from the shelter and collided with my waist hard enough to remind me about the terrorbird bruise. The panel returned. It had not rewarded my idea. It waited until the families chose to keep using the protected shelter while the storm continued. Only then did it record shelter's first proof, move my route home to 4.8%, and award civic impact because 43 people had received a real benefit. I spent the first engineering point on fault site. Blue stress lines spread across the wall and half the hill behind it. Most of Flint water was the color of a warning sign. Then a gold circle opened beside me. A stone-plated OR oaks emerged, 3 times my height, and dragged the fallen crossbeam from the mud with one horn. His name was Ruk. My first magical beast was construction equipment with feelings. I loved him immediately. Then Ruk stepped onto the saturated terrace, sank to his knees, and destroyed 3 survey markers trying to escape. So much for easy mode. The final warning showed a mana-charged great flood reaching the valley in 90 days. Only 95.2% of the route home, 4 settlements, and an extinction-level flood stood between me and home. Good thing I had a degree. Bad thing I had 90 days. The rain did not care that I had just saved a wall. By morning, it had only changed from a downpour to a gray, patient drizzle that soaked into everything. I stood on the repaired terrace with a borrowed hide over my shoulders and told the council the most unpopular thing I could think of. The safest looking ground in Flintwater is probably the most dangerous place you have. The council speaker, set down her carved counting board. She had one white forelock and straight black hair and the eyes of someone who had watched clever men become greedy men. You saved the shelter, she said. That does not let you move the whole settlement on a feeling. It isn't a feeling, it's a slope. I just can't prove it yet. Then prove it, Wei said. With something I can see. That was fair. It also meant I needed instruments. And I owe nothing but a bruised body and a system that refused to hand me a single blueprint. Shaw found me before I found the reeds. She was my mother here. Warm chestnut hair and a low knot, a hideworker's vest the color of old mustard, and an expression that had already decided not to cry about any of this. You need cord, she said. And straight poles and clean bowls, and you already took the good ones. I'll return them. You won't? She said it without heat. I traded our best winter furs to buy your place on GAH Rose Crew. 2 seasons of curing, gone. She pressed the poles into my hands, so when you spend them on something that eats, I felt the body's guilt arrive on schedule, and, under it, my own. She had bet a winter on a son who used to drop tools. I'll spend them on the wall that keeps you dry, I said. Then the food, then the water. In that order. In that order. Shaw studied me a moment longer. The way you check whether a familiar face is still the same person behind it. Good, she said, and went back to work. Bryn said nothing at all. My father here simply walked me to the terrace edge, picked up 2 stones, and held them out. One was a flat river cobble. One was a squared block of pale quarry stone. Marker, he said. Which one holds? It was a test, and we both knew it. The river stone rolls and the wet ground swallows the flat one, I said. The quarry block. Square base, buried a third, packed with gravel, not clay. Bryn grunted, handed me the quarry block, and kept the cobble. That grunt, I would learn, was as close to praise as the man came before he decided you had earned words. Instruments came out of garbage and geometry. I lashed 3 poles into an A-frame and hung a plumb stone from the apex, so a mark on the crossbar told me true level. I knotted a long cord at even spans for measuring distance. I filled a hollowed horn with water so the surface would sit dead flat between 2 points no matter how the hill lied. My first 3 readings disagreed with each other, which was humiliating, because I had done this 100 times with a laser and a tripod. Rock crouched beside the cord, ran it through her fingers, and found the answer before I did. It stretches when it's wet, she said. Your knots move. She was right. Waterlogged fiber lengthens. She tied a second set of reference knots and marked them in 2 colors. Dry knots, wet knots. Check which you're holding before you trust the number. A healer had just calibrated my survey cord. I decided on the spot that I was going to like working with her, and filed the feeling somewhere it wouldn't slow me down. Ruk, meanwhile, wanted to help. This was the problem. Remove that marker, I told him, pointing at a stake in the wrong spot. Ruk removed the marker. He also removed the foundation boulder beside it, and a section of fence, and a good deal of my dignity, dragging all 3 across the yard while workers scattered. The crowd laughed. Not the cruel kind. The kind you hear when a puppy the size of a house misunderstands the word fetch. Pip fixed it, my 12-year-old sister, red scarf, gold eyes, a little whistle on a cord, walked straight up to 3 tons of confused oaks and put her small hand flat in the air, exactly where I had pointed. Not a sweep, a point. One place. Ruk lowered the boulder to that spot like he was setting down an egg. He doesn't understand that, Pip announced to everyone. He understands here. The whole settlement had just learned that handling my magical beast mattered more than owning him, and a child had taught them. The boulder had been hiding something. Under it, half sunk in the terrace, lay a disc of old stone carved with 7 spokes around a central hub, worn almost smooth. Orin knelt over it and went very still. The elder had silver braids and a staff set with a cyan mana stone, and he spoke a line like he was tasting it. 7 works before the Sky River, he murmured. The mothers said it. Nobody remembers what it means. Does it mean anything to you? It means I should not have forgotten it. He would not say more, so I did the only useful thing. I pressed a wet hide over the carving and rubbed charcoal across it until the 7 spokes came up dark on the leather, and I rolled the rubbing away without pretending to understand it. Then I proved the slope. I set stakes down the eastern terrace, took levels along each, and built a small clay relief of the valley on a workboard, scaled to the knotted cord. Where the ground truly fell, the clay fell. The high eastern shelf, the ground everyone trusted, sagged in the middle into a shallow buried trough that ran straight under the lower settlement. I did not tell them what it meant. I handed Wei Wei a bowl of water stained with red plant dye and asked her to pour it wherever she thought was safest. She poured it on the high shelf. The colored water ran off the trusted ground, gathered in the hidden trough, and pooled exactly beneath the huts where most of Flintwater slept. Wei Wei all looked at the red water sitting on top of her own people's roofs in miniature. "Show me again," she said quietly. I showed her again. It did the same thing. That was the proof, not my mouth, her hands, her water, her eyes. On a plank in the works yard, I carved 7 marks and named them so the whole plan could be seen without a single panel. Shelter, food, water, materials, transportation, energy, civic defense. 7 works, I said, mostly to ORN. Before the Sky River. The delayed truth of the wall, families still using it, sleep after sleep, finally crossed a line only I could see. Civic impact climbed past a threshold, and the system offered me a choice. I took survey precision, and my ragged estimates snapped into confident numbers wherever I had a real reference to stand on. It did not draw me a map. It made the map I earned trustworthy. Then ORN read the sky, and AH Shaw read ORN, and the drizzle stopped being a nuisance. Big storm, ORN said. 2 days, maybe less. I looked at my clay model, at the red water sitting over the lower huts, and did the math I did not want to do. The people I most needed to move slept in the lowest blue trough on my flood map, and I had 2 days to build them somewhere higher to run. RUUK stamped the new foundation flat with one proud, thunderous pass, and I nearly cheered. Then Fault Site lit the whole pad blue and red. The strong ground he had just packed was now a sealed sheet of wet clay, holding water under the exact spot I wanted to build on. Compaction, it turns out, is not a blessing you hand out everywhere. Press dry soil and you get strength. Press saturated clay and you get a bathtub with a lid. Dig it out, I told the crew, and watched a morning of RUUK's enthusiasm come back up on shovels. Bryn didn't gloat. He just laid broad, flat stones across the softer ground to spread the load, the way he'd told me to seed a marker. For RUUK, I painted lanes on the ground and gave him a number. 3 passes here. Stop. Not the whole terrace. 3. Pip translated the parts he pretended not to understand. My first real test frame failed too, and it failed on purpose so the shelter wouldn't. I'd built it with tight, proud joints. The kind that look like competence. Or, dunked a matching piece of forkwood in the rain barrel overnight, then set it in the frame in the morning. By midday, the soaked timber had twisted and snapped my beautiful rigid brace clean in half. Green wood here breathes, ORN said. Bind it stiff and it fights you. Bind it loose and it bends and lives. I rebuilt every joint to flex, lashed instead of pinned, and let the structure move a finger's width on purpose. NAH rebuilt the parts I didn't know were parts. She stood in my clean floor plan and started taking space away. Stretcher width here. You can't turn a hurt man in that gap. That costs me 8 sleeping spaces, 2 exits, not 1. Smoke vents, or you'll cook the sick during a storm. And a dry ledge up here for medicine that dies if it gets wet. That's 1/3 of my capacity. NAH. Then build it bigger, she said. Or explain to a mother why her child couldn't get carried out. I argued until we ran a live drill with a straw-stuffed stretcher and 40 volunteers, and 2 families collided in my single doorway hard enough to bruise. I widened the door. I added her second exit, her vents, her ledge. The plan lost capacity and gained the thing capacity is 4. The corrected shelter went up in a day and a half of ugly, soaking work. Flexible lashed joints, diagonal cross-bracing, wide stone footings on undisturbed ground, drains cut downhill, a steep pitched roof to throw the rain. When RUUK set his full 3-ton shoulder against the finished test bay and leaned, the whole frame shifted a hand's width, groaned, and settled back exactly where it started. Movement inside tolerance. That was the entire point, and no one but me could see the number that made it safe. Then the sky opened, and the settlement voted with its feet. The storm hit at dusk, harder than ORN promised. And in the rain, family after family walked past the old low huts they had slept in their whole lives and climbed to the new shelter on the high terrace. Nobody ordered them. They looked at the water rising in the trough and they chose dry. One lashing on the north bay slipped in the wind, and a joint began to sag. I was on the far side of the terrace, up to my ankles, clearing a drain that had packed with leaves. By the time I turned around, it was already fixed. GAH Rowe's crew had read the marks I'd painted on every joint, found the matching lashing in the standard kit, and tensioned it back to true without a word to me. That was the moment I stopped being a lucky concussed stranger. The shelter stayed dry through the whole storm. The family stayed in it a second night, and a third, because it was simply better, and the system finally counted what it had been waiting for. Shelter reached integration. My route home ticked to 14.3%. GAH Rowe found me in the gray morning, looked at his crew's clean repair, and did not praise me. "You're a junior designer in the work circle now," he said. "That means when it breaks, you answer for it. Try to make it break less." It was the best thing anyone had said to me since I arrived. Then A.H. Shaw screamed from below the terrace, and it was not a happy sound. The runoff I had so carefully sent downhill, away from the shelter, had done exactly what I told it to. It had run downhill, straight into the mouth of the underground food vault. A.H. Shaw hauled the door open, and black water rolled out over Flint Water's winter baskets, while I stood there and understood, for the first time, that every success I built was going to break something I hadn't looked at yet. I counted 100 baskets floating in the dark and did the worst arithmetic of my new life. I had saved 43 people from a wall, and in doing it I had aimed a river at the food that would keep 300 of them alive through winter. Kill them with hunger instead of stone. Same graveyard, slower. RUK stays out, I said before anyone could suggest it. 3 tons of OR oaks in a flooding cellar would bring the roof down on the rescue. So I went back to the oldest machine there is. I lashed a tripod over the vault mouth, ran a rawhide rope through a grooved bone wheel, and hung a stone counterweight off the long end. One failing roof beam was pinning the main rack underwater. With the counterweight doing the pulling, 4 of us lifted a beam. None of us could have shifted by hand, and Bryn the crew went in under it in relays. Pip stood outside the danger line I painted, and counted every basket out loud with clay tokens, 1 token a basket, so nobody had to go back in to check a number. 32 baskets came out before the beam had to come down. 32 out of 100. It felt like both a rescue and a funeral. Then I made it worse by being clever. I dried the salvaged grain as best I could, sealed it into the driest sealed jars we had, and closed the chamber tight to keep the wet out. Solve the water. Lock the door. Obvious. 2 days later, I opened it on inspection, and NAHRA's nose worked faster than my eyes. "That's rot," she said. Condensation had beaded on the underside of every sealed lid, and rained back down into the grain. I had kept the outside water out and trapped the inside water in, and the grain had quietly begun to spoil in the dark. A.H. Shaw didn't lecture me. She just handed me a fistful of the ruined grain. "Wet grain has to breathe before it can keep," she said. "Smoke it, air it, turn it. You seal the wound with the sickness still inside." "I solved the flood and built a swamp," I admitted. "Yes," she said. "Now build it the way food actually lives." So we built it together, and it stopped being my design and became ours. Raised slatted racks so air moved under every basket. Cross vents cut high and low to pull a draft. Smoke drying frames over a low banked fire. Stone lips around the legs that rats couldn't climb. Fitted ceramic covers, drains under the floor, and a tally of red and black tokens so any steward could read the stores at a glance. A.H. Shaw owned the food. I owned the load paths, the airflow, and the counting. The first complaint came within a day, and it was the good kind. The oldest residents hated the new raised racks, because now they had to hoist a heavy jar to shoulder height, and old shoulders don't. The system gave me nothing for a design people resented. So I added a low-loading platform and a little pulley basket, and a grandmother who had glared at my racks lifted a full jar with one hand and grunted the way Bryn grunts. Satisfaction only moved after the part people hated changed. The payoff, when it came, did not come as a ceremony. A household whose roof the storm had torn open got the first measured ration issued from the new stores, quietly, while their repairs went on around them. Spoilage on the tally fell, week over week, and stewards I never assigned began rotating the stock on their own, oldest baskets forward, without me in the room. Food reached integration because it now linked to shelter, to drainage, to the count, to the people. My route home moved to 28.6%, and A.H. Shaw, handing out grain that other hands had saved and other hands would keep, looked at me across the smoke, and I heard myself call it our stores. She heard it too. I did not get to enjoy the moment. A child folded to the ground in the food line, hot to the touch, and NAHRA was across the yard before the basket hit the dirt. She pressed her red tally cord to her lips, counting knots, and her face closed like a door. "Not one child," she said. The whole lower quarter has this fever, and every sick child in Flintwater drank from the same place, the spring. Everyone in the valley called the cleanest water they had. Nahra caught my sleeve before I could go admire the spring. Listen to me before you're clever again, she said, low and fast. If you hand clear water to sick children and you are wrong, your wall means nothing. They will remember the healer who let the engineer poison the well. Then we don't guess, I said. We prove where it goes first. It was the first time we worked as one instrument instead of two opinions. She marked every sick house on my clay map and wrote the day each child first fell ill beside it. I read the slope and the soil between those houses and the spring. The pattern wasn't random. The illness walked downhill from the waste trench, on a delay, toward the source everyone trusted. To make it visible, I poured a bright plant wash into the waste trench at dawn and told the timekeepers to watch the spring. By afternoon, the spring ran faintly colored with the same dye. In knelt at the outflow and named the thing I couldn't. The blue seam drinks here and spits there, he said, tracing the porous mana rock. It carries the water, it carries whatever the water touches, and it carries what we pour for the dead upstream. Clean looking, deadly. The two words had finally come apart. My first fix looked like a triumph and was a tramp. I layered gravel and charcoal and fine sand into a barrel, ran the spring through it, and out came water so clear you could count the grains at the bottom. I was proud of it. Nahra wouldn't let a single cup be handed out. Clear is not the test, she said. I've buried clear. She took 2 vessels of the same clear water, treated one with a reactive herb wash her grandmother used as a warning sign, and left the other. The warning herb turned in the untreated cup. Not a diagnosis, she was careful to say, just an old sign that something was still wrong. My beautiful, clear water had failed a test older than my whole civilization. So we built the real thing, the boring thing, the thing that actually works. A protected intake upstream of every use, walled off from hands and waste. A settling basin to drop the silt, grated gravel, sand, and charcoal to polish it. And then heat, because filtration flatters you and boiling doesn't lie. Fuel was the wall we hit. There was not enough firewood to boil for 300 people forever, so we set dark stone pots in the sun to pre-warm the water for free, boiled only what the sick and the youngest needed first, and rationed the fire like the medicine it was. Somewhere in that grind of buckets and steam, the system decided people were truly using it. I took flow mapping, and the likely paths of water lit up wherever I had gathered real evidence to feed it. Then a gold circle opened in the shallows and tide arrived. A turquoise river tortoise the size of a cart, patient gold eyes, shovel-flat forelimbs, and an unerring instinct for exactly the wrong place to sit. Tide immediately sensed the contaminated seam running deep under the bank, which was genuinely useful. Then Tide settled her entire bulk directly into the clean water outlet and flooded the settling bed I had just finished. My second magical beast was a 2-meter cork with opinions. Nahra trained her while I sputtered. She set colored flowstones in the water, dropped food beside the right channel, and turned my vague waving into a language a tortoise respected. Green stone, clear that channel. Food here, hold this line. Within a day, Tide dredged the right bed on command, and when a saturated bank sheared off under a worker, she wedged herself against the current and held him pinned safe until we hauled him out. The proof that mattered wasn't the tortoise or the clear water. It was the knots on Nahra's red cord. Day after day, she counted fewer new fevers, and then almost none, and the lower quarters children got up off their mats. People lined up at the covered cisterns because they wanted to. Operators I didn't supervise kept the fires and cleaned the beds, and water reached integration. My route home stood at 42.9%, 3 of 7, and as the settlement drank safe for the first time, Tide went still in the shallows, turned her heavy head toward the deep river, and felt something I couldn't. A slow, regular pulse far under the water, beating like a buried heart on a schedule older than Flintwater. I filed it next to the 7-spoke stone and the number 2041 in the growing drawer of things this world had not yet explained. But the safe water only reached the houses close to the spring. To carry it to everyone, I needed hundreds of lengths of hard, sealed pipe. And Flintwater could not fire a single one of them without it cracking to pieces in the kiln. Shna's kiln was a squat clay dome that could bake a good bowl and nothing longer. I wanted pipe, and pipe meant heat that Flintwater had never held on purpose. So I did what an engineer does when he's certain, which is the most dangerous thing an engineer can be. I added a tall chimney to pull the draft, packed an insulating shell of ash and clay around the dome, and set 3 mana stones in the walls to hold the heat between firings. The temperature climbed exactly the way I predicted, and I felt like a genius for about an hour. Na did not. She had short violet-black curls, amber eyes, and clay to the elbows, and she stood at the fire mouth listening to it like a doctor with an ear to a chest. "The clay is singing wrong," she said. "It goes high and thin near the blue heat. That's not a happy sound." "Give me one controlled batch," I said. "I'll watch every vessel." I heard her. I just didn't weigh her enough. The kiln taught me the difference. A crack opened along the whole length of the dome with a sound like a tree splitting in frost. Heat and cinders vented sideways. Workers dragged the fuel clear before the yard caught. I threw my forearm across the air gate to shut the draft and felt the skin go from hot to a white line of pain. When it was over, half the pipe blanks had split lengthwise, and Na's good clay was ruined, and everyone had watched the settlement's clever new engineer set his own solution on fire. This was supposed to be how I scaled clean water to the whole valley. Confidence is a resource too, and I had just spent a season of it in one afternoon. Ra treated the burn right there in the yard, wrapping it while the cleanup went on around us. She did not let me enjoy being a patient. "Say it," she said, pulling the wrap tight. I heated everything at once and let each vessel expand at its own speed until the whole thing tore itself apart. "Louder." Na standing right there. So I said it louder, and I said her name, and something in the yard shifted when the engineer took the blame in front of the people who watched him fail. Na stopped being angry and started being useful, which for Na was the same energy pointed a better way. "There are 3 clays in that bank, not 1, she said, crouching to draw in the dirt. "The gray sings wrong. You temper it crushed old shards, wood ash, ground shell, or it fights the fire. And you read the flame color, not a guess. Straw gold holds. White means stop." Row, arms folded, added the rule that saved us. No more full domes on a hope. Little coupons first, small bars. Break them yourself before you trust them with the winter. I couldn't magic the recipe out of the air, so I did it the slow, honest way. I fired dozens of little test bars at different tempers and ramps, then bent them, dropped them, thermal shocked them in cold water, and read the failures with my own eyes. The gray clay tempered with shell and shard survived what plain clay could not. We rebuilt the kiln smaller and smarter. A slow heat ramp so nothing shocked. Deliberate expansion gaps so the pieces could grow without shoving each other. A refractory lining Na mixed from the surviving coupons. In walked the structure with his staff and moved a manastone by a hand's width. "Off the seam that carries the weight," he said. "Let it warm the air, not the bone." The second firing came up straw gold and held there, even and patient, and the first long pipe came out of it whole. Bryn built the test that made a crowd believe it. He sealed one pipe between a jar raised high on a frame and a capped outlet, so the water's own height pressed on the seams with nowhere to go. The pressure climbed. The pipe darkened with damp. A hairline of us waited for the crack. It held. The cheer that went up was not worship. It was relief, the kind you only earn after everyone watched you fail first, and it was worth 10 times more. Then reality handed me the next problem before I'd finished smiling. We assembled a run of pipe from 3 different makers' batches, and nearly every joint wept. Each craftsman had made an excellent pipe to their own eye and their own hand, and no 2 diameters matched. Materials had passed its proof. My root home stood at 47.6%, and I stood there holding 2 pipes that were each perfect and could not be joined to each other. A civilization is not a pile of good parts. It's parts that fit. Rowe saw where I was going before I said it, and he didn't like it. "If every pipe has to match one ring," he said, "then Flint water doesn't need master potters. It needs a mold and a mule." "It needs masters for every problem the ring can't solve," I said. "The ring just stops good people from wasting a week discovering their pipe doesn't fit their neighbors." He wasn't convinced. Rowe distrusted cleverness that hadn't bled yet. "Show me a live reason," he said, "before I spend scarce hands cutting spare parts for failures that haven't happened." The valley provided the reason within the hour, as it liked to do. A supply cart hauling dry grain and 2 workers with kiln burns snapped its axle pin on the rutted track. The old way to fix it was to find a craftsman, measure the hole, and carve a new pin to fit, which was most of a day with a wounded man lying in a cart. Instead, Bryn held my ring gauge to the broken hole, called the size, and his apprentice pulled a pre-made pin of that exact gauge from a pouch of spares. The cart rolled again in the time it takes to tell it. Rowe watched a standard part put a hurt man back on the road in minutes, and he stopped arguing about the idea and started arguing about how to do it right. The propagation trial almost broke his new faith. I gave the same pattern, the same gauges, the same molds, to 2 separate crews with no supervision from me. One crew's pipe batch dropped straight into the ring. The other crews failed, every piece a hair too wide. Their gauge had warped where it sat too near the kiln, and a warped ruler lies to everyone who trusts it. Gah solved it in a way I never would have thought to. He built a protected master set, kept cool and locked, and made checking your working gauge against the master a small daily ritual with his own hand on it. Standards didn't erase his mastery. They gave it somewhere new to live. The impact from all that daily use crossed a line, and the system offered again. I took material stress site, and now when I compared two tested samples, I could see the cracking and heat and fatigue laid over them like a map, though it never once whispered a recipe I hadn't earned by breaking something first. Then Ember arrived in a gout of theatrical flame, a coral orange salamander, cream gold belly, bright teal eyes, rounded fins instead of demonic spikes, and an ego the size of the kiln. Ember hit the target heat instantly, which was miraculous, and then held it far past the mark and cooked an entire tile batch to slag, because I had told him hotter and hotter to a salamander means yes forever. My third magical beast was a furnace that wanted applause. Na tamed him the way she tamed the fire. She painted heat bands on the kiln in colors and whistled rhythms to match, and taught Ember hold, rise, and stop as 3 different songs. The next batch of tiles came out of a dozen molds identical enough to stack. With a salamander running the heat and a locked gauge keeping everyone honest, the workshop finally reproduced itself. Separate crews turned out pipe, tile, pins, and simple wooden gears that all fit together, and materials reached integration. My root home stood at 57.1%, and the system let me take load path projection, so I could hold 2 designs in my head and watch the forces choose their road through each. VAA made it official in the way that mattered, not with a ceremony but with a rule. The work circle is a standing council now, she said. GAH leads it, KYE designs for it. Neither of you owns it. It was exactly the shape I wanted, and I'd learned enough to be glad she'd said it instead of me. Then a runner came up the track, out of breath, mud to the waist. The runoff I kept redirecting. Storm after storm, fix after fix, had finally carved through the settlement's only supply road and dropped a whole span of it into the river. And on the far side of that new cut, a quarry worker lay with a crushed leg, the river rising between him and the only healer who could save it. Ra did the triage before I'd finished looking at the gap. Hours, she said, not a day. Cold and shock will take the leg, then take him. Whatever you build it now. The engineer's temptation sat right there in front of me, and it was a trap. I only needed a bridge that worked once. One crossing. Get the stretcher over, and who cares if it stands tomorrow? But the system had been clear from the first day. It did not count a one-use death trap. It counted things people could trust with their lives more than once, which, annoyingly, was also the right thing to build. So I sketched a narrow truss, and Ra took it apart before the charcoal was dry. Stretcher width, not shoulder width, 2 people passing, 1 hurt. Hand lines both sides, somewhere to set a load down and breathe. Or, rejected my timber outright. Straight river wood goes brittle when it drinks, he said, and put his hand on a length of curved root wood instead. This one grew fighting the current. It likes to be pushed. I put his rootwood where the forces pushed hardest, and his knowledge became my compression members. RUUK tested it, and the test went wrong in exactly the way I needed it to go wrong now instead of later. He walked the deck slowly, and it held his weight straight down without a groan. Then he shifted, and the whole span swayed sideways, a slow, sickening roll, because I'd built the up and down strength and forgotten the side to side. RUUK's hoof slid toward the edge before he lunged back to solid ground, and my heart went with him. Vertical fine, lateral, a death trap. The failure I'd have discovered with a stretcher on it if the OR Oaks hadn't found it first. I fixed it against the clock. Diagonal cross bracing to kill the sway. Lashings soaked and pre-tensioned so they wouldn't stretch loose in the rain. Wider stone abutments, Bryn seated on undisturbed ground. Deck panels, I could pull and replace one at a time. Painted lanes so traffic knew its side. Pip earned her place on that bridge. She'd learned to read RUUK's ears, and when one flicked and his weight rocked before a footing shifted, she called the stop a full breath before I saw anything wrong. We reseated the footing and the second test crossed clean. Then the real crossing, with a life on it. The stretcher team went over as the rain came back. 4 bearers and a man who was mostly gray by then. Halfway across a panel lashing worked loose, and I opened my mouth to stop everything. I didn't have to. A trained worker knelt, pulled the matching lashing from the standard kit on her hip, and retied it to the marked tension without the stretcher ever slowing. The gauges and the standards and the boring locked master set carried a dying man across a river, and none of it needed me. He reached Ra. She kept the leg, she kept the man. Somewhere in the noise, a gold circle opened over the gorge and KIT dropped out of it. A survey hawk with a 2-meter wingspan, white and teal, amber wingtips, sapphire eyes, and the moral compass of a magpie. KP's first act, as my fourth magical beast, was to steal the shiny gauge pen off the bridge rail mid-test. KITA's second act, once a dried fish appeared, was to trade it back and then carry a guideline clean across the gorge to scout a safer road cut I couldn't see from the ground. Useful. Larcenous. Both at once. I was starting to sense a pattern in the beasts the system chose for me. Transportation took its first 2 bands, and my route home climbed to 66.7%, 2/3 of the way home, and the flood clock had eaten 1/3 of my 90 days. Then a column came over the ridge in step, disciplined, carrying ore, and at its head walked a man who priced everything he looked at. VOS, Speaker of Stone Bank, ash blonde, steel blue eyes, a gray mantle with hard, geometric trim. He looked at my bridge, my beasts, my workshop, and my exhausted crews, and he made me an offer with no insult in it, which made it harder to refuse. "Come to Stone Bank," he said. "We have ore, stone, and disciplined labor, everything your clever hands are starving for. Bring your gift, leave this mud behind." "I'm not for sale, and neither is the network," I said. "But I won't pretend I don't need what you're standing next to." VOSS smiled like a man who'd just been told the price was negotiable after all. "Then let's discuss what Flint water needs," he said, "and what it will cost you." He told me the cost at the broken channel, because VOSS believed in showing a man the problem before naming the price. Stone Bank climbed a pale cliff of quarried stone, harder and more ordered than Flint water, every terrace squared, every rope lift geometric. Below the settlement sat a great reservoir, nearly full, and above it ran an elevated stone channel that should have kept it filled. A collapsed rise had broken the channel's back. The water reached the gap and stopped, and the reservoir was drinking itself dry with nothing coming in. "One day," BOS said, "then rationing becomes evacuation. Restore my water, and Flint water gets ore, copper, and crews. Fail, and we both learn what I'm worth. Desperate." I negotiated before I built, because I'd finally learned that a deal is a structure too. Not payment to me. Shared ore by weight, apprentices who'd carry the knowledge home, and the standing right to maintain what we built so it couldn't be held hostage later. VAE pressed the terms into carved stone tokens, so the agreement lived in public, not in 2 men's memories. NAHRA added a clause of her own before she'd let it close. "A treatment reserve in the same contract," she said. "Clean water for the sick of both settlements, first, always, or there's no deal I'll stand behind." VOSS looked at the healer setting conditions on a quarrymaster and, to his credit, wrote it in. Then I put 4 magical beasts to work, each on the one thing it was built for. KIT carried the grade line the length of the broken channel so I could see the true fall of it from above. RUUK anchored the heavy elevated sections while Bryn's crew reset the collapsed rise on fresh stone footings. Tide worked down inside the intake, dredging and holding position in the current where no person could stand. Burr fired clay ceiling sleeves in place, hot and fast and, for once, exactly as hot as he was told. 4 specialists, 4 jobs, 1 channel coming back to life. Then the water climbed the rise and quit. I'd sealed a clay siphon over the high point, primed it and watched it pull, and then watched it stall as an air pocket gathered at the very top and broke the pull. "Peace," Stone Bank's crews muttered. Water going uphill had looked like a trick, and now the trick had failed in front of them. The fix was humble, and it was physics. I set a small vent at the high point to bleed the trapped air, a priming inlet to charge the pull, and a clear pressure jar on the line so anyone could watch it work and know it wasn't magic. NAHRA caught the thing that would have poisoned the win. "That older dead section's been standing water for a season," she said, "and made us flush the whole line before a single family drank from it." Then the siphon pulled true. Water crossed the rise, and the reservoir began to fill for the first time in a month. Pratt, S2 Bank families lined up at the clean supply, and VOS did the thing that changed him. He honored the contract in public, at the stone tokens, and sent the first ore carts rolling over Flint Water's bridge that same day. Transportation reached integration. My route home stood at 71.4%, and I took propagation analysis, so I could finally see whether a thing I built could be understood, copied, and kept alive by people who weren't me. 5 of 7. It should have felt like flying. NAHRA stopped it feeling like anything, with one quiet question by the filling reservoir. "Every plan you draw," she said, not looking at me, "has instructions for after you're gone. The shelter, the stores, the water, this channel, everything you build like you already left." "Why?" I didn't answer, And I told myself it was because Stone Bank's crews chose that exact moment to call me over. They'd cleared silt off the channel's oldest stone, and there was writing on it, older than the quarry, older than the rise. Or in, read it slowly, and his voice dropped. When the Sky River returns after 2041 winters, the crowned heart drinks first. 2041, the exact number of years the system said I'd fallen. Ra was still waiting for her answer. And Flintwater, for all its pipe and gauges and beasts and routes, was quietly killing itself, because every one of those systems still ran on the backs of tired people turning stones by hand. I saw the real cost in the grinding shed. Ra was binding a worker's mangled hand, while 3 more men leaned into the same grindstone, turning it by muscle alone, sweat running off them in the cold. The settlement had 100 jobs like this, and it was paying for every one of them in human backs and human hands. Flintwater was burning people as fuel, and I had been too busy building to notice the furnace. The river ran fast and shallow past the platform, all speed and no height, so I chose the wheel the river would actually turn. An undershot wheel, paddles dipping into the current, taking the river's push instead of waiting for a fall it didn't have. And I refused to bolt everything to one shaft. Millstone, pump, and workshop drive each got its own disengagement pin, so anyone could be stopped and worked on while the others ran. The river taught me humility again on the first turn. A wooden bearing smoked and screamed as its grease washed straight out into the water. Debris caught 2 paddles and shuttered the whole frame. Then a drive strap snapped and whipped across the platform, and Ra hauled a worker back by his collar half a breath before it took his face. The wheel turned. It just wasn't safe, and it wasn't continuous, and either failure would eventually kill someone. So I stopped chasing elegance and chased repair. Hardwood bearing blocks that could be swapped, a little reservoir feeding animal fat to the bearing so it never ran dry, paddles that lifted out and replaced one at a time, a screen upstream to catch the debris, a guard over the strap, a stop pin to kill the drive in one pull, and painted wear marks so an operator could see a bearing going bad before it failed. Rowe added the rule that made it real. Before anyone restarts it, he said, they take one bearing apart and put it back. If they can't, they don't run it. The wheel jammed again while we were still learning it, and that jam changed everything between Ra and me. We were both out on the wet platform clearing the screen, tied to the same safety line because one slip meant the current. And she asked me again, roped to me over a killing river, the question I kept dodging. After you're gone, she said. You keep saying it. After you're gone, where do you think you're going, Kye? I was done lying to her. Another world, I said. My world. The panel, the quest lines, the return home, it's real and it's a gate, and finishing the 7 is how I open it. She didn't drop the line. She didn't stop working. Her hands kept moving on the debris while her voice went flat and cold. Then stop making me design a future you already removed yourself from. We cleared the screen. We untied the line. And something warm that had been growing between us stepped back into the cold and stayed there. The corrected wheel, when it finally ran beautifully. It drove the millstone and the pump at once, and the 3 men who had turned the grindstone by hand went to do work only hands can do. Then the operators did the thing that mattered more than the wheel itself. They tripped the stop pin on purpose, pulled a worn paddle, dropped in a fresh one, and restarted the whole machine, and I was standing 40 paces away with my hands in my pockets. Energy took its first 2 bands. My route home climbed to 81.0%, and I took mechanical synchronization, and the timing and friction and lost power of every moving part laid itself out for me to tune. The wheel had one more thing to give the valley, and it was not a gift. Its steady vibration traveled down through the platform footings and cracked open a side channel that had been sealed with silt and stone for longer than anyone's memory. Something in that channel had been sleeping. It came up under the intake in a rush of silver blue, long-bodied and finned and furious, and tore one of my support posts out of the riverbed like a weed. A river drake, MOR, though I didn't have the name yet, big enough to fold my new wheel into kindling, and every instinct I had to drive it off with noise and force only pushed it back toward the one place I could not let it go, straight down the channel that led to the flood. My first idea was force, and force made it worse, the way it always did with me at first. I threw a lure and a burst of current to wash the drake downstream and away. MORA turned my current into a launch ramp and came up the intake straight at the platform crew. RUUK set his 3 tons against a timber barrier to hold the line. MOR simply rolled beneath it, unbothered, and Tide surfaced beside me with her head cocked toward the deep, sensing not one heartbeat back there but many small ones. Kill it, and its body would plug my intake and rot in my water. Kill it, and I might destroy whatever those small pulses were. NaHRA solved what my engineering couldn't, because it was never an engineering problem. Look at her, she said, catching my wrist. Old bite scars, healed. And that. Pale, milk-colored fragments drifted on the surface. Shell. She's not attacking the wheel, NaHRA said. She's defending eggs. You put a hammer next to a nest and called it a river. ORN knew the rest. There was a current here once, he said, tracing a line on the bank only he could see. The old people closed it with stone when it flooded a field. That was her road. You woke her and she found her road walled shut. I stopped trying to remove Mora and started trying to give her back her road. 4 beasts, 4 jobs, 1 act of mercy. KIT flew Mora's loop and mapped where she swam. Tide found the deep channel under the silt where the old current wanted to run. RUUK shifted the bypass gate stone by stone onto Bryn's fresh footings. EM Burr warmed a still, sheltered pool at the end of it into something a mother might choose. And the wheel, turning steady, laid down a low, patient vibration that led away from the nest instead of into it. Mora followed the new current. She moved her eggs into the warm pool one by one, and she stopped hurling herself at my platform, and her new road quietly became a channel that would carry floodwater away from the wheel when the time came. Before she vanished into the deep, she rolled once near the surface and let a single crystalline scale drift free. No gold circle opened. No panel claimed her. The system offered me no ownership of a thing I had only chosen not to destroy. It was, I think, the first genuinely good thing I did in that world for no reward at all. The bypass gave me more than a calm drake. Where the old channel had run, it exposed a door. Ivory stone, verdigris copper, 7 spokes carved around a central hub. Exactly like the disc under RUUK's boulder, but the size of a gate. Inside was a chamber, and the chamber was filling with water, and a thing woke up to meet us. Tall, ivory stone, teal seams of light, 1 round amber eye, a broken crown shape across its shoulders. The WAR den. It did not attack. It recited loads and pressures in a calm, exact voice while the water rose around our knees. We read the walls while we hauled open ancient relief valves just to keep from drowning, which I suspect was the only way that place ever taught anyone anything. 1 crowned core at the center, 7 public functions ringed around it, failed central channels everywhere, and the same number cut into the stone again and again. 2041. The WAR den gave me the answer as a load calculation, because that was the only language it had. The crown core concentrates the mana peak, it said. Every 2041 winters the peak returns, and the concentration magnifies it. The central channels failed because control and maintenance ended when the rulers ended. A dormant civic seed was left as correction. It requires 7 safe public functions and a compatible mind. It translated those functions into concepts the mind could hold. 7 quest lines. Not a gift dropped into my skull. A safety checklist written in the only handwriting I could read, an engineer's. The monuments failed, the Warden said, because a monument has no one to keep it. A thing that is not used and repaired by many is only a bigger thing to break. NaHRA stood in the rising water and turned the whole mystery into a single instruction, the one that would decide everything after. Then don't build us a city that dies when you leave, she said. Build us one that doesn't need you at all. Monocircuit analysis unlocked as the last valve gave, and I finally saw it whole. MORA's bypass, the wheel, the copper, the water, the trust of the people using all of it, drawn together into one circuit that could carry the flood safely if, and only if, the community owned every piece of it. Energy reached integration. My route home stood at 85.7%. 6 of 7, and the panel revised, the one number I most wanted it to leave alone. The crown core was already charging. The flood was no longer 20 days out. It was 13. Word of it reached Stone Bank before I did, and VOS made the oldest mistake in the valley. He announced Stone Bank would seal its sluice, keep its water and its people to itself, and ride out the flood behind a closed gate, alone. I told VAWA I would stake everything I was on a number. A smaller surge is coming ahead of the flood, I said. It reaches the lower wall at the 3rd shadow after noon. If it doesn't, take my authority and my work seat and give them to someone who guesses less. She didn't accept on faith. She accepted on evidence, which was the only currency I trusted her with anyway. We gathered it from everywhere. Sediment bands in the cut bank, red like tree rings. The spring's rising pressure. Soil so saturated we could weigh the difference. The Red crest flock leaving the ridge early. Mora, sitting deeper in her pool. And the crown core's pulse, quickening under the river. NaHRA kept her own record. Health and well pressure, independent of mine, so no one could say the engineer cooked his own proof. Or in took the old rhyme the mothers left and unfolded it into a sequence of hours, oral memory becoming a clock. Then Vaa did it right. She planted a marked post at the water's edge and set neutral timekeepers to watch the shadows, and she showed no panel and promised no miracle. The settlement readied shelters and routes, not because they believed me, but because a test costs little and a wrong guess about a flood costs everything. The water came at the third shadow afternoon, not the flood, its smaller cousin but real and rising fast, and it hit a valley that had spent 90 days getting ready without knowing it. The wall drains opened and bled the pressure off before it could rotate anything. The shelters stood and stayed dry. The stores stayed sealed. The water tanks closed against the silt. The bridge kept its lanes so no one met head-on in a panic, and MORA's bypass swallowed the peak and carried it wide of the wheel. 0. That was the number that mattered. Across the ridge, Stonebank's sealed sluice did exactly what a sealed gate does. The water it refused to pass backed up and flooded Stonebank's own lower quarry, and VOSS had to choose between his pride and his people in front of both. He opened the sluice, and he watched the shared channel, the one he'd tried to cut himself off from, lower the water for Stonebank and Flint water alike, because a network drains what a wall only dams. The receipts came in like a tide going out. NAHRA reported not one death in either settlement. GAHRA reported damage he could repair with parts already on the shelf. AHRA reported the food and the clean water never once stopped flowing. VA named me Regional Emergency Coordinator, and in the same breath kept every node in its own local hands, so I coordinated and never ruled. VOS opened S2 owned banks, labor, and stores to the shared defense and didn't pretend it was generosity. It was arithmetic, and he was finally doing it right. Civic defense took its proof. My route home stood at 95%, and the impact crossed the line that made my beasts eligible to grow. And then the valley took back its gift, the way it always did. An upstream slope, loosened by the surge, let go all at once. It buried the ore convoy and smashed the upstream bridge, and it took with it the copper conductor and the gate hardware the whole final defense was designed around. And it buried people. Stonebank families traveling with the convoy, gone under the slide and the rising water. I had authority over the entire region at the exact moment the region lost the one material my design could not do without. And somewhere under that mud, someone's family was still alive, and running out of air, and time, and me. My first complete defense map was beautiful, and it was a lie, because it needed more copper than existed in the whole valley. I tore it in half in front of the council, before anyone could fall in love with a plan we couldn't build. Forget the metal we don't have, I said. We build the defense we can actually make, out of what's actually here, starting now. So we invented a conductor out of desperation and dirt. ore, and I tested fired manaclay, channels packed with charcoal, troughs of brine, and the little copper we had left as contact plates only where it counted. The first tile overheated and cracked, because Bear, excited, held it too hot too long. We banded the heat, cooled the ramp, and the second tile held its charge without shattering. A worse conductor than copper, a conductor that existed. I'd take it. The berm nearly killed a crew before Pip, and a beast read the ground for us. RUUK packed one section flat, then walked to the next and simply refused to step on it, planting his feet, ears back. Pip put her hand on his shoulder and translated. He doesn't like it. It's wrong under there. Tide confirmed it. A hidden pocket of saturated soil, a void waiting to swallow whatever we built on top. We moved the gate footing off the void before it collapsed, and a child and an OR ox had just done a soil survey. No instrument of mine caught. Then the hardest failure, the human one. A cluster of northern households flatly refused to use the main shelter, and I nearly wrote them off as stubborn. NAHRA didn't. Listen to why, she said. Their elders would have to lie down in an open lane, beside the animal pens, in full view of strangers to be treated. To them, it wasn't a floor plan. It was an indignity they'd sooner drown than accept. NAHRA redesigned it while the DRO ran. Partitions, a separate access, clean flow kept away from dirty, and the northern families walked into the shelter on their own feet. Adoption didn't rise because I argued. It rose because the objection changed the building. The best hour of that sprint, I barely touched. GAHRA's crew straightened a warped gate. SEHNA's crew refired a bad tile batch. Shaw shifted the dry stores to cover the new shelter. VAA named a local leader for every node. I stood in the middle of it and watched a settlement repair itself in 4 places at once, and my job was mostly to stay out of the way. The full drill tested all of it at once. Warning flags up the ridge. Bridge lanes split, stretcher routes marked, beast paths clear, food and water staged for release. The wheel stopped and started on command, and a gate deliberately failed to see what people did when the plan broke. VAEA sent one family the wrong way on purpose, against the traffic, to find the choke point before the flood did. NAHRA's route correction opened a second path, and the jam that would have cost lives never formed. Civic defense reached scale. My route home stood at 95.2%. The impact climbed toward 20,000, and a new option appeared in the corner of my vision. Infrastructure link, grayed and locked, waiting for a final band I hadn't earned. Then KIT came back from the ruined convoy and dropped the scrap of scorched cloth at my feet and screamed. Not debris. A signal. There were people alive up there, above the broken bridge, trapped between the slide and the rising river. The convoy held the metal my city needed to survive the flood. It also held families who would drown long before any careful, sensible, optimal operation to dig out that metal could ever reach them. And I already knew, standing there with the locked panel glowing, which one the last questline was really going to ask me to choose. BOSS said it plainly, because BOSS always said the ugly arithmetic out loud. The defense needs that ore more than it needs 30 trapped people. Dig the metal, grieve later. That's the sum. A city that spends people as spare parts has already failed its last quest, I said. I'm not building that one. People first. Now. NAHRA heard something in it and looked at me differently. Not because I'd said the noble thing, but because for the first time my choice didn't check the panel first. The return progress had stopped being the reason I did anything. VOSS didn't move. Then a runner named the families under the slide, and his own sister's children were on the list, and the quarrymaster stopped calculating and started climbing. The rain killed our signals, so the beasts became our senses. Beacon flags couldn't cut the downpour, so KIT followed the thin smoke of a survivor's fire and found them where no eye could. RUUK anchored the retrieval lines on the marked stones Bryn had set, 3 tons of certainty in a world of sliding mud. Pip relayed every call, and only from the high safe ground, because she had finally learned that being useful and respecting the danger line were the same skill. The water gave up the people slowly, and the beasts took them back one at a time. Tide braced herself against the current and held the rescuers and the floating bridge panels steady enough to walk. Ember, banked low and careful, warmed children gone gray with cold, and sealed a cracked hide float with a heat exact enough not to burn the hand holding it. When debris jammed the narrow current and trapped the last raft, the river answered a kindness I'd almost forgotten I'd done. MOR came back on her own. She struck the jam from below and burst it open and cleared the road and asked nothing, and no panel dared put a price on it. The families came into Flint water soaked and shaking and alive. They slept in the shelters that flexed and held. They drank from the water line that no longer lied. They ate H. Shaw's measured rations. And by morning they were pulling shifts on the node crews, stone bank hands on Flint water ropes. One people learning it was one people. VOS put Stonebank Sluice under the shared timing plan, not as a defeat, but because he'd finally seen a wall lose to a network in front of his own eyes. The regional trust crossed a threshold I'd stopped watching for, and my beasts answered it. RUUK's plates spread and darkened toward blue-gray, and he could feel bad ground and hold a set load without a tremor. Bastion RUUK. Tide shell went deep cyan with silver lines, and she could hold station in a current that would roll a boat. Channel tide. Ember burned white gold at the rim, able to hold one gentle temperature across a whole room. Hearth Ember. KITE's feathers shifted to sky blue and gold, and his flight left ribbons of light a crew could follow through a storm. Beacon KITE. The first cheer for them had barely started when the ridge cut it off. The whole RED crest flock screamed at once and rose off the cliffs, and that sound meant only one thing. The flood was not 13 days away. It was not even hours. It had arrived. Early, tonight, and it reached the outer sacrificial wall before half our crews had made it back to their stations. The wall didn't fail. It surrendered, exactly where I'd told it to. The outer barrier broke along the seam I'd marked weeks before, and instead of bursting, it bled. Fired pipe pressure drains, the great-grandchildren of a single hollow reed I'd once hammered into a leaking joint, opened all along its base and let the water out before it could rotate the main terrace. The first thing the flood met was the first thing I ever built, grown up and multiplied, and it held. Then the flood ran the whole valley at once, and the whole valley answered. Shelter joints flexed and groaned and did not break, because ORN had taught me green wood has to move. The ventilated stores stayed dry above the water, because A.H. Shaw had taught me grain has to breathe. She sealed the measured reserves as the water climbed, and NAHRA closed the treatment tanks a breath before the flood could foul them, because she had taught me clear is not clean. Every lesson I'd failed my way into was standing between 900 people and the river. Beacon Ki ran the sky and laid down ribbons of light, and the evacuation moved along them without a single head-on jam. The bridge kept its painted lanes even underwater, and when a span finally gave, its standard panels detached and floated free instead of becoming battering rams, exactly as designed. At their stations, the beasts did the work they'd been trained into, not tricks, jobs. Channel Tide HIDE held the bypass mouth clear, so MOR's old road could swallow the surge. Hearth Ember kept the grounding tiles at the one temperature that let them carry mana without cracking. Bastion RUUK stood under the main gate counterweight and became, simply, a foundation. And MOR prowled the intake, turning aside the logs that would have speared the wheel, guarding the machine that had once threatened her nest. Then the wheel died and I was too far away to save it, and that turned out to be the whole point. A tree trunk came down the current and smashed the intake, and the main gate ground to a stop, and I was at the lower wall with a rope in my hands and no way to reach it in time. I didn't have to. GAH Rowe, Bryn, SEH Na, and a crew of operators I'd never assigned pulled the standard spares, swapped the intake, and restarted the wheel without a word of instruction from me. The theme of the whole story, proven under a killing flood. The city ran because it no longer needed me to run it. The first wave passed, and Flint water was still standing, physically whole, every human being accounted for. For about 10 breaths, it felt like winning. Then the Warden's voice came flat across the water, reporting the Crown Corps' pressure climbing past what any stone or clay could hold. A blue-gold grounding node went dark at the far end of the terraces, and behind the rain, taller than the rain, the real wave rose, the mana wave, and it did not want to kill us so much as it wanted to keep the Crown Corps alive and tear the living city off the hillside to do it. The last band completed itself in the middle of the disaster, because every system in the valley was finally being used at once. Shelter, food, water, materials, transport, energy, defense, all live, all under load, all together. The impact crossed its final line, and infrastructure link opened at last, and I understood immediately why it had waited. It didn't give me an answer. It gave me the whole city as one living diagram, every pressure and flow and load and thread of mana, and it laid the choices out with brutal honesty. Close the main gate, the terraces collapse and bury the people on them. Open the gate now, the wave rolls straight through and drowns S2 Kneebank. Preserve the Crown Channel the way the old world built it, the core survives and the people do not. 3 plans, 3 graveyards. I rejected all 3. NAH found the 4th, from the one map I never thought to read, her own. The quarry basin, she said, spreading her medical route beside the stone bank map. It's empty. It's huge. My road runs right to its gate. If we sacrifice the water wheel channel and open the quarry within one narrow breath, the basin drinks the wave instead of us. It was the whole story's lesson in one move. The healer, not the engineer, read the network best because she'd always designed for the people inside it. And it needed everyone. BAA authorized the sacrifice of the wheel channel out loud, so no one could say one man chose it. VOSS threw open Stone Bank's sluice on the shared timing. ORN walked the resonance into alignment, oral memory and measured mana finally speaking one language. GAH Rowe commanded the structural cuts. AH Shaw sealed the reserves. Bryn and Bastion RUUK loaded the great counterweight. SEH Na and Hearth Beer fused the dead grounding tile back to life without shattering it, and the beasts ran the last relay across water no person could cross. Beacon KIT carried the severed control line over the flood in a ribbon of light. Channel tied Dove and fixed it to the submerged gate. MORA burst the final logjam from below. And Pip, from the high safe ground, never once in the water, sounded the timing signal that told a whole region when to move as one. Infrastructure Link gave me a release window 2 breaths wide. I put my hand on the secondary latch, and when Pip's whistle came, I pulled it myself. The water wheel channel tore free of the hillside. The quarry gate swung open, and the mana wave, all of it, poured into the empty basin and found nothing to destroy. Then the city lit up. Blue Gold Civic Mana ran the shelters, the pipes, the road markers, the workshop standards, the bridge lines, following every path the people had worn into the valley by trusting it, and grounded itself safe in the basin. Nara found. The Warden spoke one last time, and it was not a threat. It was a record. Distributed load survived what the central core could not. 7 symbols lit gold across my vision, one after another, 936 people, out of 936, alive. My route home reached 100%, and the world gate opened, exactly as it had promised on the first terrible morning. No trick, no 8th lock, no catch. On the far side of it, I could see my own world, waiting. And behind me, without waiting for me to decide anything, the city kept working. Dawn came up on a valley that had changed its shape and kept its people. The healing house had its own roof now. The water ran clean into every quarter. The kiln glowed orange, and standard parts moved on the mended road, and signal ribbons hung in the wet blue air, and beasts worked beside the handlers who loved them, and Stonebank Sluice pulsed in time with Flintwater's own. The ledger did the last decent thing it ever did for me. It wrote the credit not to me, but to the operators, the crews, the healers, the elders, the names of the people who would still be here after the gate closed. And the 4 communities gave the network a name that wasn't mine. ASS TRA. Many fires under one sky. Bryn found me at the gate and put the first stone wedge into my hand, the one I'd driven into a dying wall on my first morning, the one he'd kept. "You started reliable," he said, which from Bryn was a speech. A.H. Shaw held my face and said the thing she'd been deciding not to cry about since the beginning. A gate changes distance, it doesn't change family. Nah Ra did not ask me to stay. "It'll hold if you go," she said. "You built it so it would." Then she untied the last clear marker from her red tally cord, the cord that had counted the fevers and the survivors and the 0, and she knotted it around my wrist. "I expect that back," she said. I told her I'd use the gate, but not as an escape from anything, and I meant it, and she saw that I meant it. The system gave me one last gift I hadn't asked for and no longer needed. Because the city ran so completely without me, the open one-way gate settled into something steadier, a route that would come back around on its own cycle. I was already free to leave. Now I was free to return. RUUK had the last word, the way he'd had the first. He walked to my old survey stake, lifted it as gently as an egg, looked to Pip for the signal, and set it down exactly where I pointed, in precisely the right place, the perfect opposite of the day he'd dragged it, an offense and my dignity across the yard. I looked at the stake, standing true, in a city that would break somewhere new tomorrow and fix itself by noon. Apparently, civilization was not something you finished. It was something that found a new way to break every morning, and somehow, that felt a lot like home.